Hello and welcome to the Earth Trust podcast. I'm Verity Warren, Head of Communications at Earth Trust. Life on our planet depends on our natural resources and how we manage them. One such precious resource is soil, the living ecosystem that all earth-dwelling life forms depend upon for survival. This autumn at Earth Trust, we are thanking the earth beneath our feet and all it provides. I've got Ian Nutt, Director of Programmes and Partnerships, here with me today to talk a little bit about Earth Trust work, the changes we're hoping to bring about, and ideas on what we can all do to help.
Hi Verity, it's nice to be outside.
Here we are at Earth Trust Centre, perusing the environment.
Yeah, looking at the clouds that look like they're going to rain. Hallelujah, we need more of that.
So Ian, can you tell us a little bit about what you do at Earth Trust?
Yeah, of course. So I work quite closely with the land management team, but across the whole trust, so all of the different teams here, really thinking about what it is that we do, why we do it, kind of who we want to do more stuff with collaboratively. So working in projects and programs, kind of thinking about the stuff that we do on the land and the impacts of those things. So rather than just doing it for the sake of doing it, really thinking what difference are we making and how does that tap into the local political infrastructure and landscape. And also trying to attract new funders funding partners who want to work with us and work towards the same kind of impacts and changes that we're looking to achieve.
Why do you think that thinking about soil is so important, and why are we at Earth Trust talking about it now?
Soil, it's one of those funny things, because it's under our feet and because we kind of walk on it or drive past it or go past it without really understanding it. But of course, it makes up such a fundamental part of everything, all life on Earth. The really fascinating bit about it is that the really productive bit of the soil is only what is known as the topsoil. So it's the first kind of 6 inches of soil that's underneath the ground. That is the bit that's really productive in terms of offering us our food. But it is so chock-a-block full of life, not just biodiversity in the sense that we think of life, but also all of the gases that are so important, that make things grow, that are good for our environment, good for sequestering carbon and all that sort of thing that we hear about a lot, but also things like water retention. So quite often when you see really poor quality soils where they've been stripped of all of their goodness, you'll see water runoff. So when it rains really heavily, you'll just see a quagmire of mud rather than soil that's held together, where you get really good structured soils. So it cannot be underestimated how important soil is. And without all of those nutrients and all of the gases and the water retained within the soil and the structure of it being right, it's not capable of growing any of our food that we so desperately need.
You know, we've heard a lot in the news and various different sort of bodies talking about how degraded our soil is becoming across the world, and in the UK we know it's a problem, but how much of a problem is it for us in Oxfordshire?
It's a problem globally, and part of that is just down to the history of how we have farmed, in particular in the Western world, in Western countries, is that we have farmed without due care and due diligence to our soils. And that's not particular to the Earth Trust or Oxfordshire. That is just the way that we have farmed. And the intensification of farming, and we've not taken, paid real attention to look after the earth, to really care for those natural resources. We didn't know, the science wasn't there in the same way. We weren't paying attention to what it was that we were doing to these natural resources. And over an actually relatively short period of time, that intensive farming practice has really stripped the soil back and stripped back our natural resources to a point whereby we are now limited on how much longer the earth can produce food for, without us really taking radical steps to put the goodness back into the earth. There have been voices out there in particular that have really been raising this question for a very long time, for decades, and it's only now that we're really understanding it as climate change is biting at the same time, that it's not until things become really drastic that people realize they've really got to take action, and take action quick. But the other fundamental problem is food production is inextricably linked to food consumption. So how we eat food and what choices we make and how we treat food, and that westernized way of treating food as a as a commodity that you can just throw away or just disregard and have no value in, and the markets make it incredibly cheap and undervalue what it costs and what it takes to create and make food, has driven that ability, that demand to then produce more of it quicker, faster, cheaper. And that is where the food system has become broken in Western society.
And I guess just expecting things to be there all year round and all of the time, not their avocados or their plums or whatever it is.
Yeah, and there is part of a reality about us with food, accepting and understanding that having everything we want when we want it is actually not a sustainable option. And we will have to start giving up eating melons and strawberries at Christmas if indeed we want to go down a more sustainable route.
Absolutely. So we've talked a bit about some of the problems. What is Earth Trust trying to do to support change? And I guess I'm thinking here both, what are we physically doing in the parts of the earth that we care for, and also what changes are we trying to influence for beyond that?
Yeah. So I hate using this phrase of we're on a journey, but we are. The Earth Trust is on a journey along with all other farmers, really, in really grasping the nettle now and trying to understand what it is that we collectively need to do to shift and change things. So we're in a really great position at Earth Trust. It's not that we haven't been doing stuff up until this point, but like all farmers and food producers, we're just having to really redouble our efforts and review and think really hard about what it is that we do. So we're being quite data-led now and information-led on the farm in deciding what it is that we do, what changes we want to put in place. So we've recently done a full carbon audit of the farm, and without that knowledge of what practices are best for carbon, for example, we're not able to make the changes that we really want to see. So we're starting to put a lot more time and effort into that kind of practice, that kind of evidence-led work. And then applying that over future years for the farm. And our head of land management's doing a really exciting job of looking at all of that data and getting external inputs and expertise in to really help us with that. And then outside of our own farm, we're starting to work a lot more closely with other farmers and other landowners through networks to really try and work collaboratively with others, because we're not going to change this on our own. The farm literally stops at the farm gate where we are, but of course the landscape and the impacts of that go way beyond that. So we have to think about how we farm in the context of Oxfordshire and the surrounding area. So a farm might have biodiversity on it within its own network, but that spills over into villages, towns, cities around us and the neighbouring landscape. And especially really good way to think about it is with river courses in particular, because of course they move, they run, they flow. So whatever you do on this farm here will soon end up in the farm further downstream. And and that's the same with all nature, all wildlife. The air moves, biodiversity moves, and it's up to us as collective landowners to make sure that we are stitching all of that together.
And do we know yet what kind of changes we will be making ourselves?
Some of it, and we know certainly what we want to do, and a lot of this is carefully balanced with the subsidy system that comes in. So like all things, and we have the double whammy of being a charity at the Earth Trust as well. So we're not just a conventional farmer that can just make commercial decisions in the same way. So what we're having to decide and think about is what subsidies and what incentives are out there that we can tap into to make those changes. But without a shadow of a doubt, we're looking at how we change things like the rotation of the crops, putting a lot more trees within the fields and the field margins, looking at field margins that have more wildflowers within them for pollinators, interplanting, so putting other plants within the crops that we're growing as well to give crop cover, so that's sequestering more carbon, reducing runoff, all of those kinds of things which are still relatively innovative, even though they're probably exactly how farming was 100 years ago. Of course, everything comes full circle. So we're starting to really think about and implement and plan for those measures, but it can't be underestimated how much of that is only possible through the right incentives being provided for us to be able to do that.
So we've been talking a lot about what we're doing. What can people at home do to support some of these larger scale changes? You were talking about the decisions we make, about food we buy and so on.
Yeah.
Is that the kind of thing that people can do?
Yeah, it really is. And people shouldn't underestimate the power of the individual to make changes. I've always had this approach of, well, if I don't do it myself, how can I ever then have an opinion or help anyone else if I don't do it myself? So,
Yes.
Collectively, if we all do it, then it creates a far greater impact. And there are various things that I believe that we can take that makes a really big difference. The first one is never throw food away in particular.
Yeah.
And I know it's really easy. We hear about this and we talk about it a lot, but the amount of food waste is phenomenal still in the UK. It's huge. And there's something that has to fundamentally change. I know there's been a lot of coverage lately about wonky veg and all the rest of it. But in some ways, that's doing veg a disservice. It's not wonky. The thing that's wrong with the food production side of things is that actually quite a lot of it has been engineered, selected, grown specifically to not be wonky.
Yeah.
Wonky is actually natural.
Yeah.
That's the natural state of things.
Comedy carrots
Comedy carrots
are a natural carrot.
I mean, who doesn't love a comedy carrot? That's the best thing. We've got so far away from that. And things like cucumbers, they didn't ever used to grow straight. They used to grow curved. The amount of food that's wasted before it even gets to the supermarket or the shop shelves is really frightening and really disheartening for farmers and food producers. So we have to shift that completely. Never throw food away.
I always find that strange as well with the whole wonky, the wonky cucumbers, because I can't remember ever making a decision that a straighter cucumber was going to be tasty.
No, or a good thing. It fits in my fridge easier.
No, exactly. It's just sort of what becomes presented to you and normalised. But
That's
I'm not sure there was a genuine market demand at any point for that.
No, exactly. And variety as well. So encouraging a variety of food. So we don't all have to have the foods that are marketed to us. Looking at, and one of the ways to get around that is to eat seasonally. Eating seasonally is quite possibly one of the most useful rules of thumb that anyone can apply to eating that helps reduce those negative impacts. If you eat seasonally when food is in season, then you're getting around all kinds of different issues and problems with regards to food waste. Buying on a weekly basis. Food should last if it's in season. You shouldn't end up throwing it away, because when it's at its best, it will last, it will keep. And the other thing that is my own personal little tip for keeping things like leaves in particular, so any kind of cabbage or kale or spinach and herbs and all those kinds of things, is just cutting the bottom off like you would do with flowers and put them in water. So we keep them at home on a little shelf on the windowsill in a glass. So things like our kale and stuff just sits there like it would do flowers, and it keeps it alive and fresh because it's still sucking up the water. I mean, it's just
fantastic.
real basic little things like that mean that we don't throw things away then in the same way.
There's obviously a lot of conversation at the moment too about oh wow,
I've been treated to a green woodpecker.
We're all concerned about the cost of living crisis and what that means for us. We've heard a lot in the past about farm shops and buying locally, but sometimes there's also this an element of affordability in there. And if people are having to make difficult decisions about where to spend their money, going to the big supermarkets and that is the only option. And then it's harder to tell what's in season.
Yeah, I'm glad you've asked me this question. There is a bit of an urban myth around your local shop or farm shop being more expensive than a supermarket. And I know this because I once ran my own food company and had to do an enormous amount of research into prices. And the example I'll give you, which has never left me, was going to the local farm shops and various other small shops and looking at peppers was the thing. Peppers and garlic are the two that I remember. And if you actually look at the pepper that comes from a farm shop and weigh it and see how much you are paying per kilo, so your actual real price for what you get, and then compare that to and I went to 3 different supermarkets, and I shan't name them because otherwise that's a bit unfair, but 3 major supermarkets, and the farm shop pepper and garlic, for example, the 2 that stick in my mind, were cheaper from the farm shop per kilo than the supermarkets. Supermarkets do a brilliant job of marketing, and I'm not saying it's the same for every single product, but when it comes to fresh fruit and veg that's in season, locally grown, where you're cutting out all the middlemen and the transport systems and the storage and the wastage, I would really challenge that theory that supermarkets are always cheaper. There are some of the newer supermarkets that have come through in the sector now, quite possibly are cheaper in terms of real term money, and that kind of can't be argued with, and they're doing a really good thing in terms of bringing good quality food to people at affordable prices. But there are, of course, all those other unintended consequences or hidden consequences of the cost of buying something that is so cheap. But don't get me wrong, I'm not going to argue and say that everyone should or has to or must or can eat cheaper, good quality food from a farm shop, because even accessing a farm shop, is for the privileged few in the first place. So there are real realities around that. And if actually we're really looking at the affordability of good food, we need to look for the food service sector. So catering in schools, hospitals, care homes, sheltered housing, all of that kind of meal provision. And they can purchase good quality produce at affordable prices from those caterers.
Yeah, absolutely. Our conversation was drawing to a close, so I asked Ian for any final takeaways on what we as consumers can do to make choices that will help support improvements to how food is produced.
Yeah, I think I would go back to seasonality. The seasonality rule of thumb is really big. It comes into play when you're buying your own food, choosing the foods that you're going to eat, but also then for us here at Earth Trust, our pumpkin event that's coming up is a prime example of that. What we're doing is we're really raising the profile of seasonal food production and the varieties. So we made a really conscious decision not just to go with pumpkins. We are showing the real biodiversity of squashes that you can produce naturally and what they do for your food, for your plate. So seasonality is a really big thing. As I've mentioned it already, diversity of food, going out there and trying new stuff that will come with seasonality. There'll be all kinds of different things out there that we don't eat on a day-to-day basis, but are really affordable and really good to use, good to put into our diets. And from the soil side of things, I think really thinking about if you're making choices around what you want to eat, eating out and all the rest of it, is looking for some kind of labelling, some kind of accreditation, some kind of traceability that means that you know what it is, what those production systems are for producing that food. There are loads out there that people can go away and look at. I'm not going to favour anyone in particular, but of course everyone knows and has heard about organic. There's also LEAF, so linking environment and farming. All of those kinds of accreditation schemes, Pasture-Fed Livestock Association. If those labels are on the food that you're choosing and buying, they at least then do give you some knowledge that you're buying into sustainable farming systems.
Yeah, absolutely. And we've just come to meet the cows, who definitely look like they agree with us on all of these points.
I think they do. I think they were keeping quiet in the background.
So Ian, thank you so much for talking to me today.
You're very welcome.
And it's lovely to have a little walk around the farmyard.
Yeah, we've seen the cows, we've seen a woodpecker, smelt the smells.
Exactly, seen some pumpkins.
Yeah.
I'm Verity Warren, and you've been listening to the Earth Trust podcast.